She was standing in his kitchen like she belonged there, a woman he had never met, stirring something on his stove while his daughter laughed at the table like this was completely normal. Logan Pierce stood in the doorway, soaking wet from the rain, and couldn't move. Then she turned around, looked directly at him, and said, "I know about the wooden box, Logan, and I know what Claire never got to tell you." 6 years. He had spent 6 years making sure no one would ever say that name in his house again. Drop a like if you want to know what was inside that box, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard that Tuesday evening, the kind that showed up without warning and turned the drive home into something miserable. Logan Pierce sat at a red light 3 blocks from his house, with the wipers going at full speed and still barely able to see, and he thought about nothing in particular. Just the chicken thighs he was pretty sure he had in the fridge, and whether Maisie had remembered to do her reading homework without being asked. She usually hadn't. She was 7, and homework ranked somewhere below drawing horses and arguing about what constituted a reasonable bedtime. He didn't blame her. He barely blamed himself anymore for letting things slide on the nights when he came home too tired to enforce rules about anything. The light changed. He turned left, pulled into the narrow driveway alongside the duplex on Crestwood Avenue, and sat in the car for a moment listening to the rain hammer the roof. The porch light was on. He could see the faint glow from the kitchen window. That part was normal. He'd set the lamp in the living room on a timer 2 years ago, so he and Maisie would never come home to a dark house. But the kitchen light wasn't on a timer. Logan turned off the ignition and stared at the window for a second. Then he grabbed his bag, pulled his jacket up over his head, and jogged to the front door. He heard her before he saw her. Maisie, laughing, not the polite, uncertain kind of laugh she used around adults she didn't trust. The real one, loose and unself-conscious. The one that still occasionally knocked something loose in his chest because it sounded exactly like her mother's. He pushed the door open and stepped into the front hall, dripping onto the mat. "Dad," Maisie called from the kitchen without looking up. "Did you know Victoria lived in Japan for a whole year?" Logan set his bag down slowly. He walked to the kitchen doorway and stopped. A woman stood at his stove with her back to him, stirring something in the large pot he usually only took out for pasta. She was maybe 30, maybe a year or two either side of that, with dark hair pulled back in a loose knot and a cream-colored blazer draped over the back of one of his kitchen chairs like she'd decided it was a coat rack. She was wearing a gray blouse and dark slacks, and she moved around his kitchen with the casual ease of someone who had been in it before, which she had not, because Logan had never seen this woman in his life. Maisie was sitting at the table with an almost finished bowl of what looked like rice and vegetables in front of her, and she had the relaxed, slightly glassy expression of a kid who had already been thoroughly entertained for the last hour. "Hey," Logan said. His voice came out flat. The woman turned around. She was striking in a way that registered before he had time to process it. Dark eyes, sharp cheekbones. The kind of composed expression that came from spending a lot of time in rooms where other people were watching. Not beautiful in a way that asked for anything, just a fact about her, like height. "You must be Logan," she said. She didn't apologize for being in his house. She didn't look nervous. "I'm Victoria. The soup needs about 4 more minutes." "Victoria," he repeated. "Sterling." She held his gaze. "I'm Claire's sister." He didn't move. Maisie pushed back her chair. "She knew Mom," she said, with the matter-of-fact delivery that 7-year-olds used for information they'd already processed and moved past. "From before." "I know who she is," Logan said, which was a lie. He did not know who she was. He had never heard Claire mention a sister named Victoria. He had never heard Claire mention much about her family at all, which at the time he had attributed to grief. Claire's parents had both died before he met her, and she spoke about her family in the vague, edited way that people did when the subject cost them something. He had not pushed. He had been 26 and in love, and he had thought there would be time for everything later. There had not been time for everything. Victoria turned back to the stove. "Maisie, can you grab the bowls from the second shelf?" "She knows where my bowls are," Logan said, not quite able to keep the edge out of his voice. "She showed me." Victoria adjusted the heat without looking at him. "She also told me you usually get home around 6:30 and that you make the same 4 dinners on rotation, which I'm not judging, for what it's worth." "Maisie." His daughter looked at him with wide eyes. I didn't think it was a secret. It's not a secret, it's just... He stopped. He looked at Victoria. Can I ask how you got in? Maisie let me in. Maisie is 7. I introduced myself through the door first. She called your workplace to verify. Victoria glanced back at him. She's resourceful. You've done something right. Logan looked at his daughter, who had climbed up to reach the bowls on the second shelf and was handing them down with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who knew she was being observed. He had, in fact, taught her that. Never open the door to someone you don't know. If they said they were someone official, call and check. He had drilled it into her enough times that she'd started making him prove his identity as a joke on weekday mornings, demanding that he state his name and purpose before she would pour him coffee. He had not anticipated the loophole. We'll talk about this, he told Maisie. I did call, she said. Sandra said you'd already left. Sandra at the front desk. She was very nice. Logan pulled out a chair and sat down. His jacket was still damp. He hadn't taken it off. He looked at the woman standing at his stove and tried to organize his thoughts, which were not organizing. Victoria Sterling, he said. Yes? Claire's sister. Younger sister, by 4 years. She tasted something from the pot, added a pinch of something from a small tin she'd apparently found in his spice cabinet, and put the lid back on. Claire never mentioned me. I know that. She had reasons. What reasons? That's the part we need to talk about. The rain was still loud against the windows. The kitchen smelled like ginger and something savory that Logan couldn't identify, good enough that his stomach had already registered it separately from everything else happening in the room. He hadn't eaten since noon. Okay, he said. After Maisie's in bed. Victoria nodded. Obviously. Dinner was strange in the way that situations with no precedent were strange. Not hostile, just slightly off-register, like a song played in the wrong key. Maisie, who had apparently exhausted most of her curiosity during the hour before Logan arrived, ate her food and asked Victoria 2 more questions about Japan, and 1 question about whether soup counted as a real dinner or more of a side thing, which Victoria answered without condescension by explaining that it depended on what was in the soup and that this particular soup was trying very hard to be a real dinner. It's succeeding, Maisie said. Thank you. Logan ate and said almost nothing. He watched Victoria. She didn't try to perform normalcy harder than necessary. She didn't oversell warmth at his daughter or shoot him reassuring glances across the table. She sat in his kitchen chair in his house and ate soup like someone who had made a decision and was waiting to see how it landed. After dinner, Maisie went through her nighttime routine with unusual efficiency. Logan suspected Victoria had said something to her during that hour before he arrived, some quiet word about giving him time, but he didn't ask. He read Maisie half a chapter from the book they were working through, waited until her breathing slowed, and turned off the bedside lamp. Victoria was still at the table when he came back. She had refilled her glass of water and pushed her bowl to the side. The soup pot was covered on the stove. Logan sat down across from her. How did you find me? It took a while, she said. A year, more or less. Claire never told me your last name. I had a first name, a city, a job description that turned out to be outdated, and about 3 sentences worth of description from letters she wrote me that I didn't find until after she died. Letters? She wrote them, but never sent them. Victoria folded her hands on the table. I found them in her room at the house, in a shoebox under the floor panel behind her closet. It was the kind of hiding place that took some looking for. A pause. The kind you use when you know someone might go through your things. Logan said nothing. She talked about you, Victoria continued, about a man named Logan who worked with his hands and had a dry sense of humor and read too much and couldn't parallel park to save his life. She talked about a baby. She talked about wanting to come back. The last 3 words hit him somewhere specific. He kept his face still. She died in the accident. She died 6 weeks after the accident, Victoria said, at Hargrove Medical Center. Complications from internal bleeding that the surgical team identified but did not treat aggressively in the first 48 hours. I know how she died. Do you know why the treatment was delayed? Logan looked at her. Do you know, Victoria said more carefully, why the family was told that her condition had stabilized when it had not? Why you were not contacted? Why the decision was made to move her to a private facility instead of transferring her to the trauma center that had the surgical team that could have helped her. The kitchen was very quiet. "What are you saying?" Logan's voice came out lower than he intended. "I'm saying I've spent 3 years looking into what happened to my sister." Victoria's composure didn't crack, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something that had been there the whole time, contained and patient, and not patient at all. "And I'm saying what I found is not an accident, not entirely. There were decisions made. People who had opinions about who Claire should and shouldn't have chosen to be with. People with enough money and enough connection to make those opinions matter in ways that they should never have mattered." Logan stood up. He didn't intend to. His body just did it, the way it sometimes did when something hit too close to the center. He walked to the counter. He put his hands flat on it and stared at the backsplash. "You need to be very careful," he said, "about what you're telling me." "I know." "Because what you're describing—" He stopped. "That's not... People don't do that." "Some people do." Her voice was even. "When they have enough to lose and enough to protect, and when they've already decided the person they're protecting is the only one who matters. Claire mattered to me. She did not matter to the people in her family who saw her as a liability, and Logan Pierce as someone who had no business being attached to the Sterling name." He turned around. Victoria was looking at him steadily with the expression of someone who had anticipated this reaction and was not going to blink. "How much of this is documented?" he said. "Enough to warrant a conversation with a lawyer. More than enough, I think. But I need—" She hesitated for the first time since he'd come home. "I need some things from you too. Things only you would have." "What things?" She glanced toward the hallway, then back at him. "There's a wooden box," she said. "Claire mentioned it in one of her letters. She sent you something before the accident. She said she sent it to the address you'd been staying at because she didn't have another one. She was afraid the letter she mailed to the house might be intercepted, so she sent a separate package to you directly." Victoria held his gaze. "She said it had things inside that she wanted you to have. Things she didn't want to disappear." Logan stood very still. "She said you'd know what it meant," Victoria said. "That you'd keep it. That you weren't the kind of man who threw things away." He didn't answer. The box had arrived 10 days after the phone call that told him Claire was gone. He had been staying in the apartment above the mechanic's shop he'd been renting from a man named Roy, and the package had shown up with no return address and Claire's handwriting on the front, and he had stood in the parking lot in the cold and not been able to open it for 40 minutes. When he finally did, he had sat on the back stairs and looked at the contents without being able to look at them. And then he had put the lid back on and wrapped the box in a shirt from the bottom of his laundry pile and pushed it to the back of the highest shelf in his closet. He had moved 4 times since then. The box had come with him every time, still wrapped in the same shirt, still on the highest shelf available, still never opened again. "Where did you see it?" he asked. "Maisie," Victoria said. "She mentioned it when I was looking for a serving bowl. She said there was a box on the top shelf in your bedroom that had been there her whole life, and that her dad got quiet whenever she asked about it, so she didn't ask anymore." He exhaled slowly. "She told you that?" "She's 7, Victoria said. Not unkindly. She notices everything, and she's been trying to understand her dad for a long time. She doesn't fully know what the box means, but she knows it's connected to her mother somehow." A pause. "I think she's been waiting for someone to explain it." Logan rubbed the back of his neck. The rain was quieter now, or maybe he'd just stopped hearing it. "I need you to understand something," he said. "I have a daughter in the next room who has not had any reason to connect her mother's death to anything except an accident. She has been 7 years old for 4 months. She has a spelling test on Thursday. Her entire understanding of her own life is built on a version of events that, if what you're telling me is even partially true..." He stopped. His jaw was tight. "You understand what that means?" "Yes." "Do you?" "Logan?" Victoria's voice dropped, just slightly. "I lost my sister. I know what it cost you. I'm not here to blow your daughter's life up. I came because you deserve to know the truth, and because without you I can't prove it, and because—" She paused, and for the first time something cracked at the edge of her composure, something small and real. because you were the person Claire chose, and the people who took her from you should not get to keep winning. The word winning landed wrong and right at the same time, like a diagnosis you'd already suspected. Logan stood there for a moment, then he walked out of the kitchen and down the hall and into his bedroom. He opened the closet, reached up to the top shelf, and felt around until his fingers found the familiar weight of it through the shirt fabric. He stood there with the box in his hands. He didn't unwrap it, not yet. He carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the table between them. Victoria looked at it and didn't say anything. "I haven't opened it since the first time," Logan said. "I looked at what was inside once. Then I put it away." "You don't have to open it tonight." "I know." He sat down. The box sat between them, wrapped in an old gray t-shirt with a small bleach stain near the collar. Not what you'd imagine, if you were imagining. Just a box. Just a shirt. Just 6 years of not looking at it directly because some things, once you looked at them again, you couldn't put back. He looked at Victoria across the table. "Start at the beginning," he said. "Tell me everything." She did. Let's see. Victoria Sterling had grown up in the same house as Claire, but not really. 10 years was not a gap so much as a generation, and by the time Victoria was old enough to form real memories of her sister, Claire was already 18 and leaving. Their parents were dead by then. Their mother from an illness when Victoria was 3, their father from a sudden cardiac event the year Victoria started middle school, and what remained was the Sterling estate and the people who controlled it, which meant primarily their uncle, Declan Sterling, and his wife Pamela, and the small, self-contained world of money and expectation that they had curated around themselves like a greenhouse. Claire had escaped that world at 18 and spent the next decade building something that was entirely her own. A degree in environmental design. A job with a firm in Portland. The kind of independence that looked modest from the outside and had actually cost her something enormous. Because the Sterling money came with conditions, and Claire had chosen to walk away from most of it. Victoria had not had the same option. She had been 7 when Claire left, and 14 when their father died, and Declan had become her guardian by default. Not cruel, exactly. Not the cartoon version of an overbearing uncle, but specific in his expectations, clear about what the Sterling name meant and who they were and who they were not. "He didn't like the people Claire chose," Victoria said. "He thought she made poor decisions. Embarrassing ones was the word he used when he thought I wasn't listening. He thought her friends were the wrong kind of people. Her work was beneath her, and that she was wasting potential he had a personal investment in." "What kind of investment?" The Sterling family had controlling interest in 4 different commercial real estate ventures at the time. Declan managed all of them. He also had a working relationship with a family called the Hargroves. They were in property development and medical sector investment. She paused. "As in Hargrove Medical Center." Logan had been listening with his hands flat on the table. Now he was very still. "There was an arrangement," Victoria said. "Not written down anywhere, nothing you could call a contract. But there was an understanding between Declan and a man named Russell Hargrove that a marriage between their families would be mutually beneficial." Russell's son was 32 and had been placed, more or less, in the track of someone suitable for Claire. "It had been in the works for 2 years before Claire met you." "She never told me any of this." "I don't think she told you because she thought she'd already walked away from it. She was 30. She was in Portland. She had a different life." Victoria looked at the box between them. "And then she got pregnant, and she came back to deal with some financial matters related to her inheritance that she'd been putting off, and Declan found out about you." "How?" "Her phone." Victoria said it flatly. Pamela looked through her phone. Not professionally, not with any kind of plan. Just the ordinary, petty intrusion of someone who felt entitled to information about the people in their house. "She saw your messages. She saw enough." A pause. Declan was not happy. Logan's chest had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with physical discomfort and everything to do with the particular sensation of having your past turned inside out in real time. He had been 26. He had been in love. He had been a mechanic from a middle-class family in Ohio who had moved to Portland for reasons that didn't matter anymore. And he had met Claire Sterling at a hardware store on a Tuesday morning because she was trying to figure out what kind of sealant to use on a bathroom tile project, and he had known the answer. He had not known about uncles or arranged understandings or family inheritance. The accident happened 2 months after she went back, Victoria said. She called me once during that time. She didn't explain much, just said she was trying to sort things out and that she'd come back to Portland as soon as she could. That was the last time I spoke to her. The accident was on the highway. Yes, a genuine accident. No one caused it. Victoria looked at him carefully. What happened afterward is different. She walked him through it with the precision of someone who had been over the sequence many times and had stopped being shocked by it. The initial hospital admission at Hargrove Medical. The classification of her injuries as serious but stable. The surgical consultation that had been delayed by 18 hours for reasons the records described as logistical. The family notification that had been handled by Declan, who had called the hospital with Claire's emergency contact information already updated in their system. Updated, they would discover later, within 48 hours of Claire's return to the family home. The notification to Logan that had never happened, because Logan's name did not appear anywhere in those records. She was there for 6 weeks, Victoria said. She woke up twice. I found a nursing note, buried in supplemental records I had to request through a lawyer, that said on one of those occasions she asked for someone named Logan and was told he had been contacted and was on his way. The kitchen tilted slightly. She thought I was coming, Logan said. Yes. She waited. Yes. He stopped talking. Victoria did not look away from him, and she did not soften it, and he understood in that moment that she had decided cruelty by mercy was not something she owed him. The truth was the truth. He could have it straight, or he could have it dressed up, and she had decided he was the kind of man who would rather have it straight. He was not entirely sure she was right, but he did not ask her to stop. The treatment delay, he said, when he could. The lead surgeon's name was Dr. Thomas Waverly. He has since retired. He had a professional relationship with Russell Hargrove going back 12 years. I have the emails, or rather, my lawyer does. They don't discuss Claire directly, but the timing is specific, and there is a message sent the day after her admission that references the Sterling complication and says, "Let's see where the dust settles." That could mean anything. In isolation, yes. Combined with the treatment timeline, the delayed surgical consultation, the family's control over her visitor access, and the updated emergency contact records. She spread her hands slightly. My lawyer says it means enough. Logan picked up his glass of water and put it back down without drinking. His mind was doing something uncomfortable, pulling up memory after memory and re-examining each one through this new angle. Claire's slight evasiveness when he'd asked about her family, the way she'd said, "It's complicated," with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. The one night she'd gotten quiet over dinner and said, "I just want to get back to Portland. I want us to just get back." And the way he'd said then, "Let's go. What's stopping us?" And she'd said a few more weeks. I just need a few more weeks. A few more weeks had become a phone call he'd taken standing in Roy's parking lot from a man who identified himself as Declan Sterling and informed him with a tone of careful neutrality that Claire had passed from complications related to her injuries sustained in a car accident and that as her next of kin the family had handled the arrangements. Logan had said he couldn't remember exactly what he'd said. He thought he'd said, "She never told me she was hurt," and he thought Declan had said something like it happened very quickly, and Logan had stood in the parking lot in the November cold and known, in some part of himself that was already doing math, that there was something wrong with the timeline, that Claire had been in the accident 2 months ago, that quickly was the wrong word for something that had taken 2 months. But he had been 26 and gutted and alone, and there had been no one to tell him what to do with that feeling, and so he had filed it in the category of things that didn't have an explanation and let it calcify into grief. "Why did you wait?" he said. 3 years of looking, you said. Why come now?" "Because now I have enough." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "I spent the first year just finding documents and understanding what I was looking at. The second year working with a lawyer who specializes in medical negligence to understand what was actionable. The third year," she stopped. "The third year I was also trying to find you. It took that long. You could have hired someone." "I did, twice. The first investigator gave up. The second one found you, but..." She paused. "I wanted to come myself. I owed Claire that. and I wanted to see who you were before I told you any of this." Her expression didn't change. "I've been watching the neighborhood for 2 days. I saw you drop Maisie at school yesterday. I saw how you talked to her. You were watching us. I was deciding whether to knock on the door. And Maisie letting you in. I wasn't expecting that. I knocked because I thought you'd be home. I was going to leave a note if you weren't." The smallest trace of something crossed her face. "She opened the door before I finished the sentence. She has very fast hands." Despite everything, despite the entire impossible weight of the last 40 minutes, something in Logan's chest shifted in a way that was almost not funny, but something adjacent to it, the involuntary kind. "She does," he said. Victoria looked at him, then at the box. "I don't need to see what's inside," she said. "I just needed to know it existed. Claire's letters to me reference it. She says she sent you things that she wanted to survive, documents she'd copied, a letter she wrote, things that could matter later." She paused. "If there's anything in there that connects to the timeline I've described, or to Declan, or to the hospital, a lawyer would need to look at it." Logan looked at the box, wrapped in the bleach-stained shirt, on the table between them. He thought about the first time he'd opened it, in the cold on Roy's back stairs. He'd looked at the contents for maybe 3 minutes and then shut the lid because he'd known, at some animal level, that if he looked at it too long, he would fall apart in a way that would take a very long time to recover from. And he had a daughter coming, and he could not afford to fall apart. He'd been 26. He was 32 now. He had a daughter asleep in the next room who had just very calmly introduced herself to a stranger at the door, called his workplace to verify her story, and offered her a bowl of soup like it was nothing. His daughter, who had Claire's laugh, and his stubbornness, and a capacity for ordinary courage that he had not taught her, that seemed to have arrived in her factory installed. He put his hand on the box, not unwrapping it, just resting his hand on it. "How long will this take?" he said. "If we move forward. The legal process. All of it. My lawyer thinks 8 to 12 months for a formal investigation. Longer for any civil action." She watched him. "It won't be clean. It won't be simple. Declan has money and he has people, and the moment he understands what's coming, he's going to push back. What does he know about me? Nothing. As far as he's aware, you're a mechanic in Portland who raised a child he doesn't acknowledge. He wrote you off 6 years ago." "Good," Logan said. He looked at Victoria across the table. This woman he had never met, who had cooked soup in his kitchen and waited on his doorstep for 2 days and carried a dead woman's letters in her briefcase and driven, however far she'd driven, to tell a stranger that the story he'd been living with for 6 years was not entirely the true one. "I need to think," he said. I need a couple days." "Of course." "And I need to talk to a lawyer myself before anything else." "I expected that. And He stopped. "Maisie can't know. Not yet. Not until there's something to actually say to her that doesn't just blow apart everything He shook his head. "I need to be careful with her." "I understand." Victoria stood up. She retrieved her blazer from the back of the chair and folded it over her arm. "I'm staying at the Maywood Inn, 4 blocks over. I'll be there for at least a week." She pulled a card from her blazer pocket and set it on the table, plain, cream-colored, just her name and a phone number. "Take the time you need, but don't take too long." "Why not?" She looked at him steadily. "Because there's a woman named Renata Voss who worked in the records department at Hargrove Medical 6 years ago and has been asking my lawyer questions about immunity and witness protection for the last 3 months," she said. "And if she decides to go to Declan instead of us, the documents she has access to disappear, and we are back to nothing." She picked up her bag. "We have a window. I don't know exactly how wide." Logan stood up. He walked her to the door. She stepped out onto the porch, where the rain had slowed to a thin drizzle, and turned up the collar of her blazer against the damp. "Victoria," he said. She stopped. "The soup was good." She looked at him. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite grief, and might have been both at the same time. "Claire taught me," she said. "It was her recipe." She walked down the porch steps and up the sidewalk, and Logan stood in the open door and watched her go until she turned the corner and disappeared. He stood there another moment. Then he went back inside, locked the door, walked to the kitchen, and sat down at the table. The box was still there. He sat with it for a long time. He listened to the rain slow down and stop entirely, and the street outside go quiet, and Maisie's sleep breathing on the baby monitor he still kept on the kitchen counter because old habits died hard. And he thought about a woman on a hospital bed asking if someone named Logan was on his way. He thought about Claire's laugh, about how it had sounded the first morning she'd woken up in his apartment and said, "You don't have any coffee." And he'd said, "I have instant." And she'd said, "Logan, that's not coffee. That's a threat." He thought about Maisie, who had that same laugh and didn't know it. He didn't open the box. Not tonight. But he moved it from the table to the kitchen counter where he could see it, because leaving it on the top shelf of the closet suddenly felt like a different kind of lie, and he had done enough of those without meaning to. He made himself a cup of coffee, real coffee, because he'd learned, and he sat at the counter in the quiet house, and he thought about what came next. He didn't sleep much. Logan lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and did the thing he'd spent 6 years training himself not to do, which was run the timeline backwards. Claire leaving Portland. The 2 months of phone calls that had gotten shorter and more careful, Claire saying things like soon and just a little longer, and him reading that as complexity, as family obligation, as the particular friction of someone trying to untangle themselves from a world they'd left behind. He had not read it as fear. He had not read it as someone being quietly boxed in. He thought about the night she'd called him from what sounded like a bathroom, speaking in a lower voice than usual, and said, "Logan, I need you to know that whatever happens, I didn't change my mind. About us. About any of it." And he'd said, "Claire, what does that mean? What's going on?" And there had been a pause, and then she'd said nothing. "I'm just being dramatic. Forget it. How's the Hendersons' exhaust situation?" And he had let her redirect him. He had let her turn it into a joke because he hadn't known what to do with the version of the conversation that wasn't a joke. He turned over. The baby monitor on the nightstand relayed Maisie's breathing in its steady, unconscious rhythm. He thought about what Victoria had said. She asked for someone named Logan and was told he was on his way. He'd read somewhere once that the hardest kind of grief was the kind that got revised, that losing someone was one wound, and then finding out the shape of the loss was different than you'd understood. That was a second wound, and it didn't cancel the first one. It just sat next to it. He wasn't sure that was true. He wasn't sure it was wrong either. He gave up on sleep around 4 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen counter with Victoria's card in front of him until the light outside the window shifted from black to the flat gray of early morning. Then he picked up his phone and called his lawyer, Hassan. His lawyer was a woman named Diane Cho, who had helped him set up a custody agreement with no one 6 years ago and had since handled 2 contract disputes for the shop and 1 boundary issue with his landlord. She was 53 and had a filing system that looked like chaos and was in fact meticulously organized, and she did not enjoy being called before 8 in the morning, which Logan knew and did anyway because he couldn't wait. "Someone died under suspicious circumstances," he said, without preamble, when she picked up. "Someone close to me, 6 years ago. A woman I'm now in contact with says there are documents suggesting deliberate treatment delays at a hospital with financial ties to the family. She has a lawyer already. I want to know what my exposure is before I commit to anything." A long pause. He could hear Diane moving around her kitchen. "Before 8 on a Wednesday, Logan." "I know." "Someone close to you." "The mother of my daughter." Another pause. Longer. "Okay," she said. "Come in at 10. Bring whatever you have." He had the wooden box. He didn't tell Diane that over the phone. He got Maisie up at 6:45, which was their usual time, and she came out of her room in her pajamas with her hair pressed flat on one side and her eyes at about 60%, and she stood at the counter and watched him make eggs with the expression of someone conducting a passive quality assessment. "You were up late," she said. "I was. I heard you in the kitchen. You're supposed to be asleep at that hour." "I was mostly asleep." She climbed onto the counter stool and propped her chin in her hand. "Is Victoria coming back?" Logan cracked a second egg. "I don't know yet. I liked her." "I could tell." "She didn't talk to me like I was little," Maisie said, which was a specific complaint she had about specific adults and always had been. "She just talked to me like a person." You are a person. I know that. Some adults don't. She watched him push the eggs around the pan. She knew stuff about Mom. He kept his attention on the pan. Did she tell you things about Mom? No, she said that was your job. A pause. She said she knew Mom a long time ago and that Mom was brave. She didn't say anything else. Logan put the eggs on a plate and slid it across the counter. He stood on the other side and looked at his daughter, who was 7 years old and already knew that some adults were going to condescend to her and had developed an efficient system for identifying the ones who wouldn't. She picked up her fork and started eating, and he thought about what Victoria had said. She's been waiting for someone to explain it. And he thought about what he owed Maisie and what he owed himself and what the difference was between protecting someone and just avoiding the hard parts. Mom was brave, he said. That part's true. Maisie looked up at him. She didn't say anything. She just looked, the way she did sometimes when she was deciding if the moment was finished or not. It wasn't finished, but it wasn't the right time yet either. Eat your eggs, he said. We're leaving in 20 minutes. He dropped Maisie at school and drove directly to Diane's office, which was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and had an elevator that worked about 70% of the time. He took the stairs. He put the box on Diane's desk without unwrapping it. She looked at it. What's that? The short version, he said, is that Claire Sterling sent me a package roughly 10 days after she was admitted to the hospital she eventually died in. She hid it so her family wouldn't intercept it. I opened it once and didn't look at it closely, and I've kept it for 6 years. Diane sat down slowly. And the long version? He gave her the long version. He went through everything Victoria had told him, in order, as accurately as he could. Diane listened without interrupting, which was something she was good at. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, and she wrote on it occasionally, but mostly she just listened, and by the time he finished, she had written maybe 12 words and underlined 3 of them. She looked at the box. Have you opened it since? Not yet. Open it now. He did. He unwrapped it slowly and set the shirt to one side and put the box on the desk between them and lifted the lid. It was smaller than memory had made it. Rectangular, maybe 10 inches long, the kind of plain wooden box you could buy at any craft store. Unfinished wood with a small clasp. Inside exactly as he'd left it 6 years ago. A folded envelope with his name on it in Claire's handwriting. Beneath that, a small stack of papers, folded and held together with a binder clip. A photograph, face down. A silver bracelet he recognized. And a USB drive in a small plastic sleeve. Diane leaned forward. Don't touch the papers yet. Can I? Yeah. She put on the reading glasses she kept on a cord around her neck and unfolded the top paper carefully. She read it. Then the second. Then the third. Logan watched her face. She didn't react dramatically. Diane Cho had 30 years of experience with things that should have been dramatic and mostly expressed her responses in a flattening of her expression rather than any escalation of it. But he saw something shift, a small tightening around her eyes. She looked at the USB drive. Do you know what's on this? No. We need to find out. She didn't touch it. Logan, I want to be careful about how I describe what I'm looking at, because I haven't verified any of it, and because the woman who gave you this information has her own interests in how this goes, but... She took off her reading glasses and held them in one hand. If these documents are what they appear to be, and I want to emphasize if you may have copies of internal hospital records relating to Claire Sterling's treatment, along with what looks like a timeline she put together herself of the communications she received while she was trying to manage things from the family house. She was organized, Diane said, not without respect. She knew something might happen. Logan looked at the folded envelope with his name on it, Claire's handwriting, which he had not seen in 6 years. Round at the tops, slightly left-leaning, the L with its particular loop. The letter, he said. Read it at home, Diane said, not unkindly. Not here. He nodded. I need to talk to this Victoria Sterling myself, Diane said. And I need to talk to her lawyer. And we need to get that USB drive looked at by someone who can verify what's on it without compromising the chain of custody, which means I need to make a call before you plug it into anything. She capped her pen. This isn't small, Logan. If it holds up, it's not small at all. Medical negligence with demonstrable willful delay and potentially deliberate interference with patient access, that's not a nuisance filing. That's criminal territory. Victoria said her lawyer is already in contact with someone named Renata Voss, a former records employee at Hargrove. Diane wrote the name down. Okay, that's good, if it's real. Whistleblower with inside access changes the shape of this significantly. She tapped the pen on the pad. But I want to stress something. What? The people on the other side of this have money. The Sterling family isn't some small operation, and if there's a Hargrove connection, you're talking about institutional weight that is going to push back. They're going to call this a grieving father, manufacturing a narrative. They're going to look at you and see someone they can discredit. She looked at him steadily. Are you ready for that? No, he said honestly. But I'm going anyway. Diane held his gaze for a moment. Then she wrote something else on the pad. Okay, leave the papers and the USB drive with me. Take the letter and the photograph. I'll call Victoria Sterling today. He repacked the box, photograph, bracelet, letter, the USB drive, and papers staying on Diane's desk, and latched the lid and carried it out under his arm. It was lighter now. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing. He went to the shop because he didn't know what else to do with the hours between Diane's office and picking up Maisie, and because physical work had always been the place where his brain slowed down enough to be useful. The shop was a 4-bay operation he'd been co-running for 3 years with a man named Eddie Reyes, who was 58 and had the hands of someone who'd been doing this work since before Logan was born, and the disposition of a man who had no patience for drama and infinite patience for engines. Eddie was under a lifted Subaru when Logan came in and did not emerge, just said, from somewhere beneath the undercarriage, "You look like you got run over." "I didn't sleep." "Maisie sick?" "No, something else." "You gonna tell me about it?" "Not today." "All right." A sound of something being torqued. The Anderson Civic came in. Brake line. Logan put his jacket on the hook and pulled on his work shirt. "I'll take it." He worked through the morning. The familiar rhythm of it, the specific weight of tools, the logic of a mechanical system being followed backward to the source of a problem, the way an engine told you what was wrong if you knew how to listen. It didn't fix anything, but it put a temporary floor under the churning. He replaced the brake line and rotated the tires on a pickup and started a diagnostic on a sedan whose owner had described the noise it was making with a series of sound effects that had been more enthusiastic than accurate. He found the problem anyway. Around noon, he sat on the shop's back step with a sandwich he didn't particularly want and his phone, and he looked at Victoria's card. He called the number. She picked up on the second ring. "Logan? My lawyer wants to talk to you. And your lawyer." He peeled back the bread and looked at what was inside, then put it back. She looked at the papers from the box. She thinks they're significant. "What about the USB drive?" "She's having someone verify what's on it. She said chain of custody." "Right. That's right." A pause. "How are you doing?" He found the directness of the question slightly disarming. Not "how are things going" or "are you okay," which were social formulas. Just "how are you doing," as if she actually wanted the information. "I'm working," he said. "It helps." "Claire said that about you," Victoria said. "That when something was wrong, you fixed things with your hands. She said you rebuilt an entire section of her apartment once when you were upset about something and wouldn't tell her what." He stared at the alley behind the shop for a moment. There was a cat sitting on a dumpster lid looking at him with complete indifference. "The water heater connection was bad," he said. "She said you didn't stop until 3 a.m. "It was a bad connection." Victoria was quiet for a second. Then, almost as if she hadn't meant to say it, "She talked about you like you were the sanest person she'd ever known." Logan didn't answer. "I'll send you my lawyer's contact information," Victoria said, back to her regular register. "His name is Marcus Webb. He's been on this for 18 months. He's careful." "Good." "And Logan, the woman I mentioned last night, Renata Voss. Marcus spoke to her again yesterday. She's ready to cooperate, but she's scared. She has a condition." "What condition?" "She wants immunity confirmed before she hands over anything, which means we need a formal investigation opened before she'll commit. which means we need someone official to look at what we have and decide it's enough to proceed. She paused. The documents in Claire's box, if they're what we think they are, might be the thing that tips it. How long? Weeks, not months. Marcus has a contact at the state medical board with jurisdiction over Hargrove Medical. If the documents check out, he can move quickly. She stopped. Quickly for legal timelines. I want to be honest about what that means. I've been patient for 6 years, Logan said. I can manage a few more weeks. He finished the call and sat on the step for another minute. The cat on the dumpster got up, stretched with complete self-satisfaction, and jumped out of sight. He thought about going back inside. Then he thought about the envelope in his jacket pocket, which he'd been not thinking about all morning with the focused effort of someone very deliberately not looking at a thing. He took it out. His name in Claire's handwriting, Logan. The L with the loop. The envelope had been sealed and he had never opened it, 6 years ago on Roy's back stairs. He'd only looked at the papers and the photograph and put the lid back on. The envelope he'd left sealed. He couldn't have said why exactly. Maybe because a letter was more direct than documents. Documents you could hold at some distance. A letter was someone talking to you. He turned it over, still sealed. He put it back in his pocket. Not here, Diane had said. She was right. Not here. He picked up Maisie at 3, and she talked the whole way home about a disagreement she'd had with her friend Priya about whether a certain tree on the school playground was climbable or not. And Logan listened and made the appropriate sounds and thought about almost nothing except how she gestured when she talked. The specific animation of it, her hands going in the same direction as her sentences, and how Claire had done exactly that, and how he had never told Maisie that because it had always felt like a thing he needed to protect. Not from her, but for himself. At dinner, he asked her what she remembered about Victoria. She had good posture, Maisie said, which was not the answer he'd been expecting. Like she was used to people looking at her. That's a specific observation. She wasn't uncomfortable, Maisie said, poking at her rice. Some people sit like they're waiting for you to say something mean. She didn't. Logan looked at his daughter. Where'd you get that from? He said. Maisie shrugged. I just noticed. He thought about what Victoria had said. She notices everything. He thought about raising a kid alone and wondering constantly if you were doing it right, if the gaps were showing, if the things you couldn't give her were going to leave marks. And then your kid sat across from you at dinner and said something like that, and you thought, maybe some of it was okay. She might come by again, he said. Victoria. Maisie didn't look up. Is it about Mom? Yes. A pause. Are you going to tell me? When I know more. I promise. She considered this. Okay, she said, which was not fine and not whatever, but a specific, provisioned acceptance of terms. She had learned that from him. He recognized it clearly, which was both gratifying and slightly chastening. After dinner, after Maisie was asleep, Logan sat at the kitchen table. He put the wooden box in front of him. He looked at the envelope. Then he opened it. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, dated 2 weeks before the accident. Not after. Before. Which meant she had written it knowing something was coming. Knowing it before she'd known exactly what shape it would take. He read it slowly. She wrote the way she talked. Not formally, not like someone composing a document, but like someone sitting across a table from you, pausing to think, changing direction mid-paragraph when a better word came to her. She wrote about the apartment. She wrote about the project she'd been in the middle of when she'd had to come back, the client she was going to have to apologize to for the delay. She wrote about a morning she remembered, specific and small, when he'd made her coffee wrong and she'd complained about it, and he'd made her a second cup, and it was the same, and she'd drunk it anyway. She wrote, I keep thinking about that. I don't know why. I think it's just that it was such a normal, stupid morning, and I want to live inside that morning for about 100 years. He stopped reading for a moment. Then he kept going. She wrote about the family, about Declan and Pamela, and the pressure that had started the moment she'd arrived, the comments, the suggestions, the quiet insistence that she was making a mistake and that mistakes had a way of catching up to you. She wrote, I know something is wrong. I don't know exactly what shape it is yet, but I know enough to know that I want these things to be with you and not here. If something happens, There are people who will want this history to disappear. I'm not letting it disappear. She wrote, I talked to a lawyer here last week. The documents I'm sending, keep them. Don't throw them away. I know you don't throw things away. She wrote, near the end, tell her I'm sorry I missed it. Tell her I wanted everything for her. Tell her she comes from people who loved each other before they loved anything else. And that is not nothing. That is actually a lot. Logan set the letter down on the table. He put both hands flat on the surface and breathed slowly. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car went past, headlights briefly crossing the window. He thought, she knew. She had known or suspected, and she had done the only thing she could think to do, which was document it and send it to the one person she trusted not to lose it. He thought about being 26 and standing in a parking lot getting a phone call and not knowing how to do anything except grieve. He thought about Maisie, asleep in the next room, who had never read this letter and had the right to. Not yet, but someday. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in the box and closed the lid. Then he picked up his phone and texted Victoria. I read it. She knew. A pause. Then he added, she asked me to tell Maisie things. I'm going to need to do that eventually. Another pause. Thank you for coming to the door. He set the phone down. 3 minutes later, it lit up with her reply, I know. We're going to make it count. He left the box on the kitchen counter, visible, where he could see it. Then he went to bed, and this time, exhausted and emptied and somehow steadier than he'd been in years, he slept. The USB drive contained 47 files. Diane called him on Friday morning to tell him that, her voice carrying the particular flatness she used when something had exceeded what she'd been prepared for. She'd had a data forensics contact verify the drive's integrity before opening anything, and what they found was organized with the same careful deliberateness as the paper documents, folders labeled by date, each one containing scanned records, typed notes, and in 3 cases, photographs of handwritten communications. She built a case file, Diane said. Before the accident, she was building a case file against her own family. Logan was standing in the shop parking lot. Eddie had looked at him twice already that morning and said nothing, which was Eddie's version of concern. What's in it? Logan said. Financial correspondence between Declan Sterling and Russell Hargrove going back 4 years before Claire's death. Internal emails from Hargrove Medical that reference her case, not by name, but by a patient number that Marcus Webb's team has already cross-referenced to her admission records. Meeting notes from what looks like a family attorney discussing the terms of Claire's inheritance and the conditions attached to it. Diane paused. In a document Claire appears to have drafted herself. A timeline of events from the 2 months she spent at the Sterling house. Names, dates, conversations, written like a legal statement. She was preparing to file something. That's what it looks like. She had a lawyer, Logan. She'd already made contact. The lawyer's name is in the file. A woman named Carol Fitch, who practiced family and estate law in the city. Marcus Webb is trying to reach her now. Logan leaned against the shop wall. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of fall day that was technically beautiful and mostly just made you tired. Is it enough? He said. It's not nothing. The question of whether it's enough depends on what the state medical board decides to do with it, and that's not a question I can answer yet. She paused again. Marcus wants to meet. All of us. You, me, him, Victoria. He thinks we're close to having what we need to go to the board formally. When? Monday. His office. I'll be there. He ended the call and stood there another minute. Then he went back inside and got under the Subaru that had come in that morning and worked in silence until Eddie appeared at the edge of the lift and said, without preamble, You going to tell me what's going on, or are we doing this indefinitely? Logan set down his wrench. Indefinitely was my preference. Yeah, I figured. Eddie crouched down, which he did slowly now because of his knees. You've been dropping tools all morning. You don't drop tools. Logan looked at the undercarriage above him. Something came up, related to Maisie's mom. A pause. Eddie knew the basic shape of it. Claire, the accident, the raising of a kid alone. He'd never pushed on the details. He pushed on nothing, generally, which was one of the reasons they had managed to share 4 bays and a business for 3 years without a serious disagreement. You need time? Eddie said. I need Monday off. Done. He straightened up with a grunt. You need anything else? You tell me. I will. He didn't, but it was the right thing to say. The weekend was its own kind of endurance. Logan took Maisie to her Saturday morning art class, which she'd been doing for 2 years. A 2-hour session in a church rec room, not for any reason connected to the church, just the cheapest available space, run by a retired art teacher named Mrs. Okafor, who was 71 and had the energy of someone 30 years younger and no patience for half effort. Maisie loved her. Logan sat in the car in the parking lot for the first hour, reading nothing on his phone, then went and got coffee and came back. Victoria texted him at 10:30. Marcus confirmed Monday at 2, his office on Carver Street. Does that work? He typed back, yes, a minute later. How are you holding up? He stared at the question, then, Maisie's at art class. I'm in a parking lot. That's not what I asked. He looked out the windshield at the rec center entrance. I keep thinking about the timeline. 2 months. She was alive for 2 months and I didn't know. A longer pause this time. Then, I know. Me too. He put his phone in his pocket and didn't look at it again until Maisie came out at noon with a painting of what she described as a horse, but which had, Logan noted privately, a somewhat flexible relationship with equine anatomy. He told her it was good. She told him it wasn't her best work, but she'd been experimenting with color, which was a thing Mrs. Okafor had encouraged, which Logan thought showed wisdom on Mrs. Okafor's part. On Sunday afternoon, while Maisie was at Priya's house, Logan sat at the kitchen table and read Claire's timeline document. He'd asked Diane to send him a copy, and she had, after a pause that communicated her feelings about that without saying them. He read it twice. Claire had written it in the 3rd week of her time at the Sterling house, updating it as things happened. It started with small things. A comment from Declan about Logan's profession, a suggestion from Pamela that she think carefully about her situation, a phone call she'd overheard between Declan and someone she didn't identify, in which her name came up alongside a phrase she'd written as the existing arrangement with Russell. It progressed to direct confrontations. Declan telling her that her inheritance, which was still partially tied up in conditions she'd never fully resolved after her father's death, could be made very complicated if she made decisions he considered irresponsible. Pamela telling her that the Hargrove family had been waiting patiently and that patience was not infinite. Then the accident, the highway, the other car running the light, then the hospital. Claire had written 3 entries from the hospital. He didn't know how. She'd managed it somehow, in the spaces between. The last one was dated 4 days before she died and was only 2 sentences. They told me Logan is coming. I'm going to hold on to that. Logan closed the document. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He thought about the kind of person who, injured and hospitalized and being managed by the people around her, had still found a way to keep notes. He thought about stubbornness and clarity and the very specific kind of love that made you want to document things so the record would survive even if you didn't. He thought, she was braver than I knew. Then, she was braver than she had to be because the people around her forced her to be. That second thought had an edge to it that was different from grief. Harder. More directed. He thought that was probably what it felt like when grief started turning into something that had a purpose. Marcus Webb's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Carver Street that was tidier than Diane's and had a receptionist who offered them water with an efficiency that suggested this was not a small operation. Webb himself was 50, compact, with the kind of focused attention that Logan recognized as professional rather than personal. Not warm, exactly, but interested in the specific way of someone who found problems genuinely engaging. He shook Logan's hand and said, "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." "Let's just get into it," Logan said, which made Webb nod once, as if he approved of the approach. They sat around a conference table, Webb, Diane, Victoria, Logan, and a younger associate of Webb's named Simone, who had a laptop open and took notes throughout with the fluid speed of someone who had done this many times. Webb had printed copies of a summary document in front of each of them. Logan looked at his without picking it up. "I want to start with where we are," Webb said, "because I think it's important that everyone in this room has a clear-eyed view of both what we have and what we don't have yet." He tapped the edge of his document. We have the contents of Claire Sterling's drive, which Simone and I have spent the weekend going through in detail. We have the paper documents from the same source. We have 3 years of investigative work on Victoria's side, including financial records establishing the Hargrove-Sterling relationship and the communication chain between Declan Sterling and Russell Hargrove during the period of Claire's hospitalization. He paused. And as of Friday evening, we have a signed cooperation agreement from Renata Voss. Victoria looked up. She hadn't known that part. She agreed, Logan said. She agreed. Immunity is still being negotiated formally, but she's committed to cooperating with the state medical board investigation. She has copies of internal scheduling records from Hargrove Medical covering the 48 hours after Claire's admission. She has a memo, an actual physical memo, which she kept, from Thomas Waverly to the surgical department head that references a request to defer intervention on a specific case pending family consultation. Webb let that sit for a moment. He didn't name the case, but the date matches, and the patient number matches the one on Claire's admission records. The room was quiet. Logan felt something shift in his chest. Not relief, not exactly, more like the particular feeling of a thing that had been suspended for a very long time finally touching ground. That's it, Diane said. That's the piece. It's significant, Webb said. It's not a confession. It's circumstantial in a strict legal sense. But it is one more link in a chain that is becoming difficult to explain in any way that doesn't involve deliberate interference. He looked at Logan. The question is what we do with it. We take it to the board, Victoria said. Yes, but I want to prepare everyone for what that looks like. He folded his hands on the table. This is not a criminal proceeding. The medical board can investigate, censure, revoke licensure. Waverly is retired, so the licensure issue is largely symbolic. What the board can do is establish an official finding, a formal record that says what happened to Claire Sterling was not an unavoidable outcome, that her care was influenced by non-medical factors, that her death was preventable. That's what I want, Victoria said. I know, but I also want you to understand that Declan Sterling and his legal team are going to fight this, hard. They're going to argue that we're constructing a narrative around coincidence, that the timeline is circumstantial, that Claire's own documentation was the work of a distressed family member with a grudge. He paused. They're going to look at Logan specifically and try to frame this as a disgruntled ex-partner pursuing a vendetta 6 years after the fact. I'm aware of that, Logan said. Are you prepared for the personal exposure, financial records, background checks, anything they can use to complicate your credibility? I fix cars for a living. There's not much to find. They'll look anyway. Then they'll look. Logan looked at the document in front of him, then at Webb. What I want to know is whether this is enough, right now, with what we have. Is it enough to open the investigation or not? Webb and Diane exchanged a look. Simone kept typing. Yes, Webb said. I believe it is. Then let's file. Check. What Logan had not fully anticipated was the waiting. Filing, it turned out, was just the beginning of a process that moved with the particular slow momentum of institutional machinery. Forms reviewed, documents verified, parties notified. The state medical board acknowledged receipt of the complaint within 5 days and assigned it to an investigative officer named Raymond Chu, which Webb relayed by phone with a tone that suggested Chu was a good draw. Webb and Diane spent the next 2 weeks submitting supplemental documentation. Renata Voss met with Chu directly, with her own lawyer present, and gave a 3-hour interview that Webb described afterward as compelling. Logan went to work. He came home. He made dinner. He read to Maisie. He responded to updates from Diane and Webb with short messages and tried not to let the waiting turn into a pressure system that leaked into everything else. It didn't entirely work. Eddie told him once, mid-November, that he was over-torquing bolts again, which was a specific stress tell of Logan's that Eddie had apparently cataloged at some point. Logan acknowledged this and tried to recalibrate. He succeeded maybe 50% of the time. Victoria had rented a short-term apartment in the city by then. She and Logan had developed the kind of contact pattern that felt organic without either of them planning it. A couple of texts a week, an update call when there was something concrete to discuss, and occasionally, because Maisie had asked twice, dinner at the house on a Thursday. The first Thursday dinner was awkward in the particular way that situations with too many unspoken things tended to be. Victoria brought wine she didn't open, Logan made pasta that was fine but not inspired, and Maisie asked Victoria 14 questions in rapid succession, including one about whether she had ever broken a bone, one about what the most expensive thing she'd ever bought was, and one, which landed with the weight of something considered for a while, about whether she missed Claire. Victoria didn't flinch. "Every day," she said. "What about you?" Maisie thought about it. "I didn't really know her, so I don't know if it's missing exactly. It's more like—" She frowned, searching for the word. "There's a space where she would have been." Victoria looked at her for a moment. "That's a good way to put it." "Dad said she was funny," Maisie said. "She was." Victoria's voice was steady. "She was also stubborn and bad at directions, and she always thought she could carry more grocery bags than she actually could." Maisie smiled. It was small and real. "Dad's like that too," she said, "with the bags." Logan, who was standing at the stove pretending to check on something that didn't need checking, said nothing. The second Thursday dinner was easier. The third, easier still. Not because anything was resolved, but because repeated contact had the effect of making people actual to each other, rather than symbolic. And Victoria was, when you got past the composure and the careful speech, someone who laughed more easily than she let on and had strong opinions about bad pasta, and had once, apparently, argued with a Japanese customs official for 40 minutes about a decorative teapot she refused to leave behind. Maisie thought this was the best story she'd ever heard. Logan thought it was not uncharming. He didn't let himself examine that thought too closely. There was enough going on. Raymond Chu called a preliminary hearing for the third week of November. It was not a public proceeding, more of an evidentiary review, Webb explained, at which he and Diane would present the compiled case, and Chu would determine whether a formal investigation was warranted. Logan was not required to attend, but was permitted to. He attended. The hearing room was smaller than he'd imagined, beige walls, a long table, 4 people on the board side and 3 on theirs, Webb, Diane, and Logan. Renata Voss appeared via video call from another room, with her lawyer beside her on screen. She was 50-something, with cropped gray hair and the look of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was ready to set it down. Chu was methodical. He went through the documentation in order, asking questions that were precise and unemotional, the questions of someone trying to understand a machine rather than judge the people who had built it. Webb presented. Diane supplemented. Renata Voss answered her portion in a voice that stayed even when the content wasn't. Logan sat through all of it without speaking. He had been told he would not need to speak unless directly addressed, and he had been fine with that, and he was mostly fine with it, until Chu looked up from the Waverly memo and said, "Mr. Pierce, the patient in question was your partner." "Yes." "You were not notified of her hospitalization?" "No." "Did you attempt to contact her during the period she was at the Sterling house?" "Yes." "I called her. We talked. She didn't tell me she'd been in an accident." He paused. "Looking back, I think she was trying to protect me from getting drawn in before she had a plan." Chu looked at him for a moment. "Did she seem afraid to you?" Logan thought about the phone call from the bathroom. "I need you to know that whatever happens, I didn't change my mind." "Yes," he said. "I didn't name it at the time, but yes." Chu nodded and wrote something and moved on. At the end, he thanked them for their time and said the board would deliberate on whether to open a formal investigation and that they could expect a determination within 30 days. 30 days. Logan drove home in the early dark of a November evening and thought about 30 days stacked on top of 6 years, and how time did its strange math on grief. Some of it sharp, and some of it dull, and some of it suddenly, unexpectedly present again the moment you started pulling on threads. He got home before Maisie's sitter left, paid her, listened to a brief report about homework and dinner, and then went into Maisie's room where she was doing a drawing at her desk with her tongue slightly out the way she did when she was concentrating. "How'd it go?" she said, without looking up. She knew there had been a meeting. He hadn't given her details, just a meeting about important things, the kind of non-answer that she had accepted on installment for now. "Too early to tell," he said. She glanced up. She looked at him for a moment with those dark eyes that had Claire's shape and something else in them that was purely her own, something that had been there since she was 2 weeks old, and he'd stayed up all night because she wouldn't stop crying, and he'd been terrified, and the terror had rearranged itself somewhere around 4 in the morning into something that felt like being permanently anchored to another person. "You okay?" she said. He crossed the room and kissed the top of her head. "I'm okay," he said. "Finish your drawing." She went back to it. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen and called Victoria. She picked up on the first ring this time. "How was it?" "Chu is thorough," he said. 30 days for the determination. That's fast for them. Webb thought so too. He leaned against the counter. The wooden box was still there, where it had been for weeks now, just a normal object on a kitchen counter, which was something he had not expected to be possible, and was. He asked if she seemed afraid. Victoria was quiet. "I said yes," Logan said. "I said I didn't name it at the time." He stopped. I should have pushed harder when she said the things she said." "You were 26, Victoria said. "You didn't know what you were dealing with." "Neither did she." "No, but she knew more than you did, and she still couldn't stop it." A pause. "That's not on you." "I know," he said, and he meant it, mostly. The mosty being something he was working on and would probably keep working on for a while. "I know." They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking. Outside, the wind had picked up and was moving through the tree at the edge of the yard, the old oak that dropped leaves in the gutter every fall and that he had climbed once 2 years ago to retrieve a frisbee Maisie had thrown at an optimistic angle. "My uncle knows," Victoria said. "Someone told him. I don't know who, a mutual contact probably, or someone at the board who shouldn't have said anything. His lawyer called Marcus this afternoon." Logan straightened. "What did they say?" The word they used was unfounded, that the documents were fabricated or misrepresented and that they would demonstrate that if necessary. Her voice was steady, but there was something under it. "He's not going to sit quietly for 30 days. "Let him push back," Logan said. "Let him try." "Logan, Victoria." He said it firmly enough that she stopped. He had 6 years. Everything that was supposed to disappear. He had 6 years to be comfortable, and Claire spent the last weeks of her life writing notes in a hospital and hoping someone would still have them when it mattered. He stopped, surprised by the evenness in his own voice. "I'm not asking for a fight. I'm just not walking away from one either." A long pause. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He looked at the box on the counter. Claire's bracelet was still inside it. He'd put everything else back, all the documents now with the lawyers. But the bracelet he'd left because it was hers, and it belonged somewhere real, not in a filing cabinet. He thought about 30 days, about Declan Sterling's lawyer calling with the word unfounded, about Renata Voss on a video screen saying things she'd kept to herself for 6 years because she'd been scared and still scared, but doing it anyway. He thought about all the ordinary courage involved in a thing like this, how it wasn't the dramatic kind. How it was mostly just people getting up and making phone calls and going to meetings and not quitting even when quitting would have been easier. He thought Claire would have had something to say about that, something dry and specific and right. He thought he would have laughed. Declan Sterling's lawyer was a man named Gerald Pratt, and within 48 hours of the preliminary hearing, Gerald Pratt had filed a formal objection with the medical board disputing the admissibility of documents obtained through what he described as irregular means, questioned the chain of custody on Claire's USB drive, and submitted a 12-page letter characterizing the entire proceeding as a coordinated harassment campaign driven by personal grievance. Webb called Logan on a Wednesday morning to walk him through it. "Is any of it going to work?" Logan asked. "The chain of custody argument is their strongest move. We anticipated it. That's why we had the drive forensically verified before anyone opened it. Simone documented everything." A pause. "The irregular means argument is thinner. Claire owned those documents. She created them. The fact that they were in your possession for 6 years doesn't change their origin." "What about the harassment framing?" "That one's mostly noise. It's designed to slow things down and make Chu nervous about the optics." Webb's voice was measured. "Chu is not a nervous man. That's why I said he was a good draw." Logan sat in his car in the shop parking lot, which had become his default location for calls he didn't want Eddie to overhear. The morning was gray and cold, late November pressing down on everything. What do we do? We respond. Simone is already drafting. We refute the chain of custody claims point by point. We provide the forensic documentation, and we submit a supplemental statement from Renata Voss addressing the memo directly. He paused. There's something else. Logan waited. Carol Fitch called Marcus yesterday, the lawyer Claire had contacted before the accident. She's been practicing estate law quietly for 20 years and apparently kept very careful records. Webb let that land. She has notes from her consultation with Claire. They're covered by attorney-client privilege, which normally would be the end of it. But she's arguing that privilege was effectively waived by the nature of the documents Claire sent you, that Claire clearly intended to create a record that would survive and be used. She wants to discuss voluntary disclosure, meaning she'd hand over her notes. If the board requests them formally, and if we can make the case that Claire intended disclosure, it's a complicated legal argument and we may not win it. But if we do, Webb stopped. If we do, we have her lawyer's contemporaneous record of what Claire told her about the family's interference. First person, professionally documented, before the accident. Logan looked at the brick wall of the shop. Someone had scraped off the old paint down near the ground and hadn't finished the job, leaving a ragged line of exposed brick running along the bottom third. He had looked at that wall for 3 years and never thought about it. He noticed it now. Make the argument, he said. We will. A pause. Logan, I want to prepare you for something. Declan Sterling is going to escalate. This objection is the opening move, not the whole game. He has resources and he's going to use them. That means press, if he thinks it helps him. It might mean personal pressure, reaching out to people in your life, trying to isolate you or complicate your credibility. What kind of personal pressure? Calls to your employer, questions about your finances, possibly someone talking to the people in your neighborhood, your daughter's school. Webb said it evenly, without apology, because this was information Logan needed regardless of how it landed. I'm not saying he'll go that far. I'm saying he has before with other matters, and that we should be prepared. Logan thought about Maisie, about her school, about Priya's mother, who Logan saw every other day at the pickup line, and who he got along with, and who did not need someone in a suit asking her questions about her neighbor. I need to tell Maisie something, he said, before she hears it from someone else. Yes, Webb said, I think you do. He thought about how to do it for 2 days. He rehearsed sentences in the car and discarded them. He thought about age-appropriate, which was a phrase he had always found slightly condescending in the way it implied a child needed things hidden rather than just explained carefully. Maisie was 7. She was not simple. She had already absorbed the basic truth that her mother was gone and that this was a weight her father carried. And she had organized her understanding of her own life around those facts with the pragmatic emotional intelligence of a kid who had never had another version of the story to compare to. What he was about to give her was a version. Not all of it, but enough. He told her on a Friday night, after dinner, when the week was done and there was no school the next day and no reason to be anywhere. He sat on the couch and she sat beside him, and he did not frame it or introduce it, just started talking. He told her that her mother had been sick in a hospital for a while before she died, and that Logan hadn't known, and that he was only finding that out now. He told her that some people had made decisions they shouldn't have made, decisions that might have affected how well her mother was taken care of. He told her that he and Victoria and some lawyers were working to make sure that was officially recognized, that there would be a record that said it wasn't right. Maisie listened with her knees pulled up to her chest and her expression doing the thing it did when she was processing something significant. Very still, a slight narrowing of her eyes, like she was reading something printed at a small size. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Did they do it on purpose? She said. Logan had expected a different question first. Some of it, yes. Some people made deliberate decisions that they shouldn't have. Why? Because they didn't think I was the right kind of person for your mom to be with. And they had enough money and enough connections to act on that opinion. Maisie thought about this. That's really stupid, she said. Yes. And mean. Yes. She unfolded her legs and leaned sideways against him, her shoulder against his arm, the way she did when she was tired or thinking hard or both. Does Victoria know all of this? Victoria is the one who figured most of it out. Is that why she came? Yes. Maisie was quiet again. Outside, a car went past. The radiator in the corner of the living room clicked in its familiar rhythm. Mom knew something bad was happening, Maisie said. It wasn't a question exactly. She suspected. She was trying to protect herself. And us. But she couldn't. No. Maisie leaned a little harder against his arm. He put his arm around her. She was small and warm, and her hair smelled like the apple shampoo she'd been using since she was 4, because she had rejected every other option on grounds that were never fully articulated. Is it going to be okay? She said. He thought about the true answer, which was complicated and uncertain, and involved 30-day timelines and lawyers filing objections, and a retired doctor and a woman named Renata Voss, who had kept a memo for 6 years out of guilt or caution, or some combination that probably didn't even have a clean name. I think so, he said. I don't know exactly how or when, but I think so. Okay, she said. They sat like that for a while. The radiator clicked. The car sounds on the street came and went. Dad? She said, eventually. Yeah. Can we get a dog? He exhaled for, not a laugh, but the shape of one. That's completely unrelated to everything we just talked about. I know. I've been waiting for a good moment. The answer is still no. For now? For now, he said, which was different from no, and she knew it, and she settled more comfortably against his side. 2 things happened in the first week of December that changed the shape of everything. The first was that Carol Fitch agreed to voluntary disclosure. Webb called with the news on a Tuesday, his voice carrying something it didn't usually carry, which was the trace of genuine surprise. Fitch had decided, he said, that the spirit of attorney-client privilege was to protect clients, not to protect the people who had harmed them, and that Claire Sterling had made her intentions clear when she built that case file and sent it to a man she trusted. Her notes from the consultation were submitted to the board the same day. The second was a piece in a regional news outlet, not a major publication, a mid-sized news site that covered state business and legal affairs, that appeared on Thursday morning under the headline, Sterling Family Estate Faces Medical Board Investigation Over Death of Heiress. Logan found out about it when Eddie came into the shop at 8 with his phone and said, "You might want to look at this." The article was 3 paragraphs. It didn't get everything right. It described Logan as Claire's estranged partner, which was wrong in the specific way that secondhand information usually was, and it mentioned Declan Sterling by name while being careful to note he had not been formally charged with anything. What it got right was the essential structure: the investigation, the alleged treatment delay, the documents. "Where did this come from?" Logan asked Webb when he called. "Pratt," Webb said with a certainty that suggested he'd already figured it. "Declan's lawyer. They leaked it hoping to get ahead of the story and control the framing. Estranged partner, unverified documents, investigation ongoing. That's their language in the article, if you read closely. It's going to bring more attention. Yes. Which cuts both ways. If we were still trying to quietly establish the investigation, this would be a problem, but we already have the investigation." A pause. "It might actually push Chu to move faster. Nobody at the board wants to look like they're slow-walking something that's in the press." Logan looked at the article on his phone. Sterling Family Estate. A photograph of a large house he'd never seen, which must have been the Sterling property. He looked at it for a moment. The kind of old, heavy-looking architecture that said money going back several generations. The kind of building that had been designed to communicate permanence. He thought about a woman sitting in a bathroom in that house, calling him in a low voice, telling him she hadn't changed her mind. He put his phone down. "Keep going," he said. Victoria showed up at the shop that afternoon. He didn't know she was coming. He was in the middle of a brake job on a minivan when Eddie appeared at the bay entrance and said, "There's a woman in the lot who looks like she owns the building." And Logan wiped his hands on a rag and went out. She was standing by her car in a gray coat with her arms crossed, not against the cold so much as in the posture of someone containing something. She had clearly seen the article. She looked like she had been driving for a while. "You could have called," Logan said. "I was already in the car." He looked at her. She looked back. There was something different in her face today. The composure was still there, but the edges of it were less managed. She had been controlled since the night she walked into his kitchen, controlled in the particular way of someone who had made a decision to hold things together and had held them together through force of will for a long time. Today the will was showing. "Come inside," he said. "It's cold." They stood in the small office at the back of the shop, which was barely a room, a desk, 2 chairs, a coffee maker that was old but reliable. Logan poured 2 cups without asking and sat on the edge of the desk. Victoria sat in the chair across from him and held the cup without drinking. "He called my office," she said. Logan looked up. "Declan." "His lawyer called. He offered to settle. Not a monetary settlement, a terms agreement. We withdraw the complaint, acknowledge the documents were misrepresented, and in exchange, he doesn't contest my position at the company." She paused. "I run the Sterling Group's Eastern operations. I have for 2 years. It was my father's piece of the business, and Declan has always had the ability to challenge my standing in it if he wanted to push the question." She looked at her coffee. "He's pushing the question. He's threatening your job. He's reminding me that I have something to lose." She said it flatly, which is correct. I do have something to lose. I worked for that position for 8 years. It's not nothing. Logan was quiet. "I'm not taking the offer," she said, and her voice was entirely level. "I want you to know that. I'm not telling you this because I'm considering it. I'm telling you because you should know what he's doing." "What did Webb say?" "That it's a pressure tactic and legally toothless as long as my documentation is solid, which it is." She finally drank from the cup. "That doesn't mean he can't make my life unpleasant. He has board members he's friendly with. He can create friction." Logan looked at her. "Victoria." "I'm fine. You drove here instead of calling." She held his gaze. Then something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, just a small movement in the muscles around her eyes, the thing that happened when someone who had been performing steadiness for a long time stopped performing it for a moment. "I've been doing this alone for 3 years," she said. "The research, and the lawyers, and the not telling anyone, because there was no one to tell who wouldn't tell someone else. And then I found you, and there were 2 of us, and Webb and Diane and Renata Voss doing her part, and for the first time it felt like—" She stopped. "And then the article came out and Pratt called, and I just—" She put the cup down. "I needed to not be by myself for an hour, that's all." Logan didn't say anything immediately. He sat with it. Outside the office window, the shop sounds continued. An air gun, Eddie saying something to a customer in his particular uninflected way. Ordinary sounds. The whole ordinary world continuing its business. "Stay for dinner," he said. "Maisie would want you there." Victoria looked at him. "Logan, I'm not offering because I feel sorry for you," he said. "I'm offering because it's Thursday, and you apparently drive here when things get heavy, and you might as well eat something while you're here." A pause. Then, very nearly a smile. "You make it sound very practical." "It is practical." "Fine," she said. "Practical." Chu's determination came on the 14th of December. Webb called at 9 in the morning, and Logan took the call sitting on the back step of the shop in the cold because he couldn't stand to be inside when he heard it. The board had opened a formal investigation. The determination cited sufficient evidence of irregularity in the treatment timeline for Claire Sterling, noted the documentary evidence connecting the treating physician to financial relationships with the patient's family, and authorized a full investigative panel to convene in the new year. Renata Voss's testimony and Carol Fitch's consultation notes were both referenced in the decision summary. "It's official," Webb said. "We're in." Logan sat on the cold concrete step and looked at the alley. The cat was back on the dumpster. Different cat, maybe. He'd never been sure. Same spot, same posture of universal indifference. "What does Declan do now?" Logan said. "His lawyer files for a review of the determination, which he will do. He'll argue procedural irregularity, challenge the weight given to the testimony. It will slow things slightly." Webb's voice was even. "It won't stop it. The determination is made, the investigation is open. The only question now is what the panel finds and how they characterize it in their official report. How long? The panel convenes in January. A report typically takes 4 to 6 months from there. A pause. Logan, this is the part where I tell you that the report is unlikely to result in criminal charges against anyone. The criminal statute of limitations for the actions involved has passed. What we're working toward is an official finding, a formal institutional acknowledgement that what happened to Claire Sterling was not an unfortunate accident, but a preventable outcome influenced by improper interference. I know, Logan said. That's what I want. I know it is. A pause. It matters. I want you to know that it matters, even without criminal consequences. These things go on record. They affect the Hargrove family's reputation and their business relationships. Declan Sterling standing in the business community takes a significant hit. The people responsible don't get to keep the version of the story that lets them feel clean about it. Logan thought about Claire in a hospital bed saying Logan was on his way, holding on to that. Okay, he said. Okay. He sat on the step for a few more minutes. Then he called Victoria. She answered immediately. He could hear from the background sounds that she was in her office. The faint sounds of a building in business hours, someone's voice at a distance. It's open, he said. A silence. Then a breath. Okay. The investigation is formally open. Okay. Her voice was quieter. Okay. He didn't know what else to say immediately, and neither did she. And they stayed on the line in that silence for a moment that was not uncomfortable, just full of the particular weight of something that had been fought for being real. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. Go, he said. We'll talk tonight. Yes. A pause. Logan? Yeah. Thank you for Thursday dinners. He looked at the alley. The cat was gone. Go to your meeting, he said. She went. So he told Maisie that evening. Not the legal details, not the procedural language, just the essential thing, that the people who needed to look into what happened to her mom had agreed to do it, that someone official was going to look at everything and write down what they found. Maisie was eating toast. It was one of her irregular dinner requests, toast and a specific cheese and sliced apple, which Logan had stopped arguing about, and she looked up at him when he said it. Is that good? She said. Yes, it's good. She nodded, considered her toast, took a bite. Then, does Victoria know? I called her this morning. What did she say? She said okay. Maisie thought about this. That's kind of a lot when someone says okay like that. Logan looked at his daughter. Yeah, he said. It is. She ate her toast, He sat across from her and drank his coffee and thought about the year that had started with a rainy Tuesday and a woman standing in his kitchen asking about a box he'd never opened twice, and all the ground covered since then, and all the ground still ahead, and how none of it had been clean or easy or anything like the way these things went in movies where the truth arrived in a single clarifying moment and everything resolved. In real life, the truth arrived in increments, in a USB drive and a lawyer's notes, and a frightened woman keeping a memo in her desk for 6 years because she couldn't bring herself to throw it out, in a 7-year-old girl saying there's a space where she would have been, and somehow that being enough to describe an entire kind of grief. He thought about the panel convening in January, about 4 to 6 months for a report, about Declan Sterling's lawyer filing objections that would slow things slightly but not stop them. He thought about how he had spent 6 years on the top shelf of a closet, and how much further this was going to go before it was done, and how he was somehow not afraid of that. Dad, Maisie said. Yeah. Are we going to be okay? He looked at her, 7 years old, eating toast at the kitchen table, asking the question that mattered most with the directness that had been hers since she was old enough to form sentences. Yes, he said. Not I think so this time. Just yes. She held his gaze for a moment the way she did when she was deciding if she believed something. Then she went back to her toast. He got up and washed his cup at the sink and looked at the wooden box on the counter. Claire's bracelet was still inside it. He thought about taking it out and doing something with it. putting it somewhere more visible, giving it to Maisie someday, finding it a better place than the inside of a box that had spent 6 years in a closet. Not yet, but soon. He thought that was progress. The investigative panel convened on the second Tuesday of January in a conference room at the State Medical Board's main office that Victoria described afterward as aggressively beige. She had attended as an interested party, which was a designation Webb had secured for her, and she had sat through 6 hours of procedural review with her hands folded on the table and her expression giving nothing away. Logan had not been there. He had been at the shop, replacing a transmission on a pickup truck, which was the kind of work that required sustained attention and left limited room for his mind to run its own parallel proceedings. Eddie had known better than to talk to him. At 2 in the afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Day 1 done. They're taking it seriously. He had read it 3 times, put his phone back in his pocket, and finished the transmission. The panel met 4 times over the following 6 weeks. Webb attended each session. Diane attended 2. Renata Voss testified in person on the 3rd meeting, which Webb described as the pivot point, the moment when the panel stopped looking at the case as a documentation exercise and started looking at it as a story about what had actually happened to a specific woman in a specific hospital in the care of people who had been influenced by things that had nothing to do with medicine. Logan got a call from Webb on a Thursday in late February. The panel has reached preliminary conclusions, Webb said. The formal report won't be issued for another 3 to 4 weeks, but the chair communicated to me informally that the findings are significant. Significant how? The panel concluded that the treatment delay in the first 48 hours of Claire Sterling's admission was not consistent with standard of care protocols for her injury classification. They concluded that the documented communications between Dr. Thomas Waverly and the Hargrove administration constituted an improper influence on clinical decision-making, and they concluded that the failure to notify her designated emergency contacts was a deliberate act, not a clerical error. Webb paused. They're recommending a formal censure of the hospital's administrative board and a permanent notation on Waverly's licensure record, even in retirement. They're also referring the financial relationships between the Sterling and Hargrove families to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential fraud-related activity in the inheritance proceedings. Logan sat down. He was in the back office of the shop. The coffee maker was running. He could hear Eddie saying something to someone in the front bay, something about a carburetor, the sound traveling through the wall with the muffled familiarity of a place he'd spent 3 years in. The Attorney General, he said. The panel can't pursue criminal charges directly, and the statute of limitations on most of the actionable conduct has passed. But the inheritance fraud angle is different. The manipulation of Claire's financial documents during her hospitalization potentially falls within a different window. The AG's office will make their own determination. Webb's voice was careful. I don't want to oversell this. It may go nowhere, but it means there's another set of eyes on Declan Sterling that he didn't anticipate. What does it mean for the report? The official findings. The report will be public record. Anyone who looks up Hargrove Medical or the Sterling family going forward will find it. It will say, in institutional language, that what happened to Claire Sterling was preventable, that decisions were made, that the people responsible for her care were compromised by relationships that should never have entered that room. He stopped. It's not a conviction, Logan. I want to be honest with you about what it is and isn't. It's the truth, Logan said, written down where it can't be changed. Yes, Webb said, that's exactly what it is. Logan sat in the back office for a while after the call, not doing anything in particular, just sitting. The coffee maker finished its cycle and beeped. He didn't get up to pour any. He thought about the word preventable, the particular weight of it, how it meant something specific, something that couldn't be argued away. Not an act of fate, not a random tragedy, not the kind of loss you were supposed to eventually make peace with because these things happened. It meant a choice had been made. It meant someone had looked at a woman's life and decided it was less important than their own interests. And that decision had consequences that went on and were still going on in a 7-year-old girl's question about whether there was a space where someone would have been. Preventable. It was not a comforting word, but it was an honest one. He got up, poured the coffee, and called Victoria. She cried. He had not heard her cry before. He had seen her hold things together under pressure that would have broken most people, had watched her sit in rooms with lawyers and board members and say difficult things in a level voice and not give an inch. And now, on the phone in her apartment on a Thursday afternoon in February, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet and unmistakable sound of someone who had been holding something for a very long time and had finally been given permission to put it down. He didn't say anything. He just stayed on the line. After a while, she said, "I'm sorry. Don't be. I told myself I wouldn't." She stopped. 3 years, he said. "You're allowed." A silence, the kind that wasn't empty. She would have hated all of this, Victoria said, and there was something different in her voice now, something that was close to the other side of the crying, that fragile, washed-out place where grief and something that wasn't quite relief coexisted. The panels and the reports and the legal language. She would have found it unbearable. She just wanted to live her life. A pause. She wanted to come back to Portland and finish her project and argue with you about coffee. The coffee was fine, Logan said. It really wasn't, apparently. It was adequate. She said it tasted like disappointment. That's an overcorrection. Victoria made a sound that was part laugh, part something else. "Thank you," she said, "for not running when I knocked on your door." "You knocked on Maisie's door. She let you in." "You know what I mean?" He did. "I know what you mean," he said. The formal report was issued on the 15th of March. It was 23 pages, single-spaced, in the specific dry language of institutional findings, patient numbers, and procedural codes and phrases like failure to meet standard of care, and documented evidence of external influence on clinical protocol. Webb sent him a copy and offered to walk him through it. Logan read it himself first, twice, in the kitchen at the table, while Maisie was at school and the house was quiet. On page 16, in a section titled Summary of Investigative Conclusions, the panel had written, "The evidence presented demonstrates that the medical care provided to the patient was materially affected by considerations external to clinical judgment. The delays in surgical intervention were not consistent with the patient's documented condition and were influenced by communications between the treating physician and parties with a financial and personal interest in the patient's family situation." The panel concludes that the patient's death was, with reasonable medical probability, preventable under appropriate standard of care. He read that paragraph 4 times. Then he put the report down and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wooden box on the counter for a long time. Claire's bracelet was in there. Her letters, her photographs, her keepsakes. The last physical pieces of a life that had been interrupted before it was finished. He thought about what it meant to get something like this. Not justice, exactly. Justice was a word he had decided early on not to build too much on, because justice implied a symmetry between harm and consequence that rarely existed in the real world. What this was something more specific and in some ways more durable. It was the record, the official, permanent, publicly accessible record that said, this happened, this was real, this woman's life mattered, and the people who treated it like a variable to be managed were wrong. Claire had known something was wrong. She had written it down in a borrowed room, in the fragments of time available to her, and sent it across a distance to the one person she trusted to keep it. She had done what she could with what she had, which is what people actually do in the hardest situations. Not heroics, not perfect plans, just the stubborn refusal to let the truth disappear without a fight. She had been 29 years old. She had been building a life she had chosen for herself. She had sent a box of documents and a letter to a man who didn't throw things away. And she had been right about him, and that mattered in ways that were not legal or official or measurable, but were nonetheless entirely real. He picked up his phone and texted Maisie's school to say he'd be picking her up himself that afternoon. "But what?" he told her in the car. Not everything. She was 7, and 23 pages of institutional findings was not a thing you gave a 7-year-old. But the essential part. He told her that the people who had looked into what happened to her mother had finished looking, and that they had written down their findings, and that what they found was that the doctors who were supposed to take care of her mom had not done their jobs properly, and that it had been officially recognized and recorded. Maisie was in the back seat with her backpack on her lap. She was looking out the window. So it's done? She said. The investigation is done. There might be more legal things with other offices, but the main part, the part that says what happened, that's done. Does the paper say it wasn't an accident? It says the accident was real, but what happened in the hospital wasn't handled right, and that it could have gone differently. Maisie was quiet for a moment. Does it say her name? He thought about that. In the official version, it uses a patient number, but the record is connected to her real name. Anyone who knows to look will find it. So people will know who she was. Yes. She was quiet for a while. They drove through the afternoon traffic, school zone lights, crossing guards, the ordinary congestion of a Tuesday in a city. I want to read it, Maisie said. Someday, when I'm older. You can. Will you keep a copy? Yes, he said. I'm not going to throw it away. She looked at him in the rearview mirror. He caught her eye. There was something in her expression that was older than 7 and probably had been for a while. Okay, she said. Declan Sterling did not go quietly. Gerald Pratt filed 3 separate objections to the report's findings over the following month, each one challenging a different aspect of the panel's methodology. All 3 were reviewed and rejected. The State Attorney General's office opened a preliminary inquiry into the inheritance proceedings, which Pratt also challenged, and which was still ongoing. In the end, Declan Sterling received a formal written censure from the State Business Oversight Board for his role in manipulating Claire's financial affairs during her hospitalization. It was not a criminal charge. His attorneys made sure of that, but it was on record, permanent and public, and it cost him 2 commercial partnerships that had been in negotiation and 1 board seat that his partners quietly asked him to vacate. Russell Hargrove's family settled a separate civil complaint, brought by Webb on Victoria's behalf, without admitting liability. Webb had told them not to expect much from it financially, and they hadn't. The money wasn't the point. The acknowledgement, however indirect, was. Thomas Waverley, retired in a house somewhere on the coast that Logan didn't know and didn't need to know, had a permanent notation on his professional record stating that his clinical judgment had been compromised by external influence. He would never practice again regardless. But somewhere in the official record of his career, the truth existed, attached to his name. It was not perfect. Nothing about any of this was perfect, and Logan had stopped expecting it to be somewhere around the 2nd month of January when he had realized that the gap between what he wanted, which was something close to reversal, to restitution, to time operating differently than it did, and what was actually possible was not going to close. The gap was real. It would always be there. But you could build something in the space that remained. People did, all the time, without anyone making it easy for them. Victoria's position at the Sterling Group was challenged in April, as Declan had threatened. She spent 2 weeks in a boardroom situation that she described to Logan in brief, clipped summaries, and which sounded exhausting and unpleasant, and like the specific kind of fight that required you to be correct in every detail, because the other side was counting on you to slip. She did not slip. Her documentation was clean, her standing was legitimate, and the challenge failed. The night it was resolved, she came to dinner without being asked, showed up at the door with a bottle of wine and the expression of someone who had been holding herself very straight for a long time and had just been allowed to stop. Maisie opened the door, took one look at her, and said, "You look tired." "I am tired," Victoria said. "Dad made stew. It's good tonight." A pause. "Sometimes it's not as good, but tonight it's good." Logan, from the kitchen. "I can hear you." "I know," Maisie said, entirely untroubled. They ate dinner together in the way that had become, over the preceding months, the most ordinary thing. The 3 of them at the kitchen table, with Maisie driving the conversation in the zigzag way she always did, moving from school to something she'd read to something she'd wondered about to a hypothetical question about whether ants had preferences. Victoria answered all of it with the directness that Maisie had liked from the start, the quality of treating her like a person with thoughts worth engaging rather than a child to be managed. After dinner, after Maisie had gone to bed, they sat at the table with what was left of the wine and the quiet of the house, and Victoria said, "I've been thinking about moving, getting a proper apartment, not the short-term place, something with more than 1 room." "In the city?" Logan said. Near the city. There's a neighborhood a few miles north that I've been looking at. She turned her glass slowly. I want to stay close. For Maisie. And... She stopped. And? He said. She looked at him across the table. No composure as defense, no careful management of what her face was doing. Just Victoria Sterling looking at Logan Pierce at a kitchen table at 9 o'clock on a Thursday in April. And I want to stay close, she said. Simply. Not as a question, not as an opening to be parsed. Just the fact of it. Logan looked back at her. He had not let himself think about this too directly for a long time, which had been, he was aware, a choice he'd made on some level because the whole situation, the grief and the investigation and the history and the complexity, was already a lot, and adding another layer felt like something that should wait until the ground was more stable. He was not 26 anymore. He had a daughter and a business and a shelf of hard-won practical knowledge about what happened when you moved faster than your own understanding of a situation. But the ground was more stable now, and Victoria was sitting across from him looking like a person who had decided to stop waiting to say a true thing. Okay, he said. She looked at him. I think that's... Okay, stay close. He said it plainly, the way she'd said her part, without overloading it. Maisie would want that. What about you? I would want that too, he said. A pause. Not the waiting kind. The kind that was just two people sitting with a thing that had been said. Okay, she said. They didn't talk about it more that night. They finished the wine and washed the glasses and talked about something else entirely. Some story Victoria had about a difficult client, and Logan found himself actually laughing at the specific absurdity of it. And it was easy in the way that things were easy when they had stopped needing to be complicated. She left at 10:30. He stood at the door and watched her car pull out of the driveway, and then he went back inside and sat at the kitchen table one more time. The wooden box was on the counter. He had been thinking about the box for a while, about what it was and what it had been and what he wanted it to be going forward. It had started as a container for loss, and it had turned into something else. Evidence, history, the record of a woman who had refused to let the truth disappear. Both of those things were still true. But he thought it was time for the box to hold something else too. He got up and opened the drawer by the refrigerator, the one that held miscellaneous things, rubber bands, a spare key, Maisie's old art pencils that she'd outgrown, batteries of uncertain charge. He found what he was looking for, a small photograph, the kind printed at the drugstore from Maisie's birthday dinner 3 months ago. The three of them at this table, Maisie with cake on her face, mid-laugh, slightly blurred because she'd been moving. Victoria beside her with the expression of someone who had surprised herself by being happy in that moment. Logan at the end of the frame, his arm around Maisie, looking at something off camera with an expression he couldn't entirely identify except that it wasn't the expression he'd worn for most of the previous 6 years. He opened the box. He took out Claire's bracelet and held it for a moment. Then he put it around his wrist, not to keep, just for a moment, just to feel the weight of it. It was a thin gold chain with a small charm on it, a compass rose, which he had never known the significance of and had never asked. He thought maybe someday Maisie would want to know, and he would have to tell her he didn't know either, and that would be okay. Some things you carried without fully understanding them. He took it off and put it back in the box, gently. Then he placed the photograph beside it. He looked at them together for a moment, the bracelet and the photograph. The things that had been and the things that were. They didn't cancel each other out. They didn't need to. The box was big enough. He closed the lid. He stood at the kitchen counter for a while in the quiet house, and he thought about what it meant to survive something, not overcome, not triumph over, not the version where the ending erases what came before it. Just survive. Keep going. Get up and make coffee and take your kid to art class and call your lawyer and stand in a parking lot in November and decide that you are not, in fact, done with caring about things. He thought about the people who had bet against that, who had looked at a 26-year-old mechanic and decided he was a problem to be managed, a variable to be removed from a situation that didn't concern him, who had been so certain of their own importance that they had treated someone's life as a logistics problem and expected the evidence to stay buried because evidence, in their experience, usually did. They had not counted on a woman organized enough to build a case file in a borrowed room. They had not counted on a sister who spent 3 years on a question that most people would have let go. They had not counted on a 50-year-old lawyer keeping a memo in her desk out of a guilt she'd never fully resolved, or a 70-year-old attorney deciding that the spirit of her obligation was to the client and not to the secret. They had not counted on the basic, stubborn tendency of truth to persist. Not dramatically, not inevitably. Truth did not always win, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But it had a way of finding edges to hold on to, people to carry it forward, small, unlikely chains of connection that turned out to be stronger than the people who were counting on silence. Logan thought about Maisie, asleep in her room, who had Claire's laugh and Logan's stubbornness and a capacity for ordinary courage that was entirely her own, who had opened a door to a stranger because she had the good instinct to check first and the good heart to let her in, who had sat at a kitchen table and said there's a space where she would have been, and broken something open in both of them that needed to be broken open. Maisie was going to be fine, not in the easy, uncomplicated way. She was going to ask hard questions as she got older, was going to want to know more than Logan could always give her, was going to have to sit with the unfairness of a loss she hadn't chosen. That was real, and it wasn't going to disappear. But she was also going to grow up knowing who her mother was. Knowing that Claire Sterling had been brave and stubborn and loved her people fiercely and had spent the last weeks of her life making sure the truth would survive her. That was a legacy. It wasn't the one anyone would have chosen, but it was real, and it was hers. He thought about something Claire had written in her letter. Tell her she comes from people who loved each other before they loved anything else, and that is not nothing. That is actually a lot. He had been carrying that line for months. He thought he would carry it for a long time yet. He was going to tell Maisie. Not tonight. Tonight she was asleep, and tomorrow was a school day, and she had a math worksheet and an opinion about what to have for breakfast. But soon, he would find the right moment, and he would sit down with her, and he would read her the parts of the letter she was ready for, and he would watch her face as she understood, fully and truly, what her mother had been. He thought Claire would want that. He thought she would want Maisie to know. In May, when the city finally committed to warmth after months of false promises, Victoria found an apartment 4 miles north, second floor, with a window in the kitchen that got morning light in a small yard below that she said she had no plans for, but which Maisie immediately identified as having dog potential. "It's not my dog," Victoria said. "You could borrow one," Maisie said. "That's not how dogs work." "It could be." Victoria looked at Logan over Maisie's head with an expression that said she was not going to be the one to settle this, which Logan thought was, given the circumstances, entirely fair. He helped her move in on a Saturday. It was not a large operation. She had lived in a furnished short-term apartment for 6 months, and her actual belongings were minimal, but there were boxes and a few pieces of furniture and the practical business of getting things into rooms, which took most of the afternoon. Maisie helped by deciding where things should go and offering opinions that were not always solicited. At the end of the day, when the boxes were in and the furniture was placed and they were sitting on the floor of the empty living room eating pizza from boxes because there was nowhere else to sit, Maisie looked around the apartment with the assessing expression she wore when she was forming a comprehensive opinion. "I like it," she said. "Good," Victoria said. "You should get a plant." "I'll consider it." "A big one. For the corner." "I'll consider it," Victoria said again, in the tone that Logan recognized as not ruling anything out, which Maisie also recognized and filed away for later. Logan leaned against the wall with his pizza and looked at the two of them, Victoria cross-legged on the floor with a slice in one hand, listening to Maisie's comprehensive interior design opinions with a half smile and the patience of someone who had decided this was exactly where she wanted to be, and Maisie in full conversational flight, gesturing with her free hand, explaining something about how morning light should be used strategically. And he thought about the rainy Tuesday in October when he had come home to find a stranger at his stove, and how he had stood in the doorway dripping and known in some wordless part of himself that ordinary life was about to become something else. He had not been wrong, but something else had turned out to be not destruction, but expansion, a widening of what he understood the shape of his life to be. He had not expected that. He had not been looking for it. But then, The things that actually changed you rarely arrived when you were looking. There's something that nobody tells you about grief, which is that it does not end. It changes form. It gets quieter, in the way that a river gets quieter as it deepens, not less present, just less turbulent on the surface. You learn to carry it differently. You learn that carrying it is not the same as being defined by it, and that the people you've lost do not require you to stop living in order to be honored. Logan Pierce was 32 years old when Victoria Sterling walked into his kitchen and changed the shape of his understanding of the past 7 years of his life. He was 33 by the time the last legal proceeding concluded, and the final report was a matter of public record. In that year, he had learned things about cruelty and courage that he would have preferred not to know, and things about the persistence of truth that he was grateful to have been shown. He had not become a different person. He was still someone who fixed things with his hands and read more than most people thought mechanics did, and had a stubborn streak that his daughter had inherited, and couldn't parallel park without 3 attempts. He was still someone who woke up some mornings with the weight of it, the what might have been, the 2 months he hadn't known, the hospital room he would never stand in. He did not think those mornings would stop entirely, and he had stopped expecting them to, but he had also stopped living with his best self locked away on the top shelf of a closet. He had stopped treating his own life as a holding pattern. He had let someone in, let more than one person in the ways that counted, and the walls had not fallen down. Maisie turned 8 in June. They had a party in the backyard. Priya and 4 other kids from school, a slightly lopsided cake that Logan had made from scratch on the basis of overconfidence, and Victoria showing up with balloons that were slightly too many for the space and a look that said she knew it and had bought them anyway. Maisie ran between her friends and occasionally came back to the table to report on events as if Logan and Victoria were a joint receiving station for information. At one point, she ran over specifically to say to Victoria, "The balloons are perfect," and then ran back before anyone could respond. Victoria looked at Logan. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. Later, after the kids had gone home, and Maisie was inside watching television with the dazed contentment of a child at the end of a good day, Logan and Victoria sat in the 2 mismatched chairs he kept on the back porch in the mild June evening, and he thought about things that had been lost and things that had been found, and the difference between them, which was sometimes smaller than you expected and sometimes larger. He thought about what it actually meant to choose to live fully when you had been given 1,000 reasons to stop trying. He had met people over the years who had let grief calcify into a permanent wall between themselves and anything new, and he had understood them, had felt the pull of that himself. The way that staying closed was at least predictable. The way that never letting anything matter too much meant never having it matter when it was taken. He understood the logic of it. He just didn't think it worked in the end. He thought it was a way of dying slowly while remaining technically alive. Claire had not done that. She had chosen, right up to the end, to believe that the life she wanted was worth fighting for. She had built a case file in a borrowed room. She had sent a box to a man she trusted. She had held on to the belief that he was coming, right up until she couldn't anymore. He owed her something for that. Not grief. Grief was just what happened. It wasn't a debt. But he owed her the same thing she had given him, the decision to keep choosing the life in front of him. He thought he was getting there. He picked up his glass and looked at the yard where Maisie had been running 3 hours ago. The grass flattened in paths between where the kids had gone back and forth. A single balloon that had escaped tied now to the fence post, moving faintly in the evening air. "I want to show Maisie the bracelet," he said. "Soon. Tell her about it." Victoria looked at him. "She'd want that." "I know." He paused. "I want to tell her more about Claire. Not just the investigation. Not just what happened. Who she was. What she was like." He turned the glass in his hands. She should know her mother was someone who thought about the same stupid breakfast arguments as everyone else, and had strong feelings about bad coffee, and got lost constantly because she refused to use maps because she thought she had a good sense of direction, which she did not. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "She once got us lost in a parking garage for 45 minutes because she was certain she'd parked on level 3. Was she on level 3? She was on level 5. She never admitted it. Logan exhaled. that not quite laugh that had become something else, something that was partly sad and partly fond and partly the acknowledgement that some things were just real and true, and yours, even after the person who made them real was gone. "I'll tell Maisie that," he said. "She'll love it," Victoria said. "She'll use it against you forever, whenever you get lost." "I have GPS." Claire thought she had a good sense of direction. "That's not the same thing." "I'm just saying." He looked at her. She looked back. The balloon on the fence post moved in the evening air, and somewhere inside the house Maisie laughed at something on television. That full, unguarded sound that still reached into his chest and found the place where everything important lived. He thought, this is not the life he would have built if he'd been given the choice. This was the life that came after loss, which was different, had a different weight to it, a different kind of knowing, but it was a life. It was full of actual people who were imperfect and real and present, and it was going somewhere, and he was not facing it alone. That was enough. More than enough. It was, when you examined it honestly, a great deal. He reached over and put his hand over Victoria's where it rested on the arm of her chair. Not a gesture that required explanation, just the simple physical fact of not being a separate thing from the people around you. She turned her hand and held his. They sat in the June evening and listened to Maisie laugh inside the house. The wooden box sat on the kitchen counter, where it had been for months now. Claire's bracelet and Claire's letters, and a photograph of 3 people at a table, smiling, on a birthday that had happened because Claire Sterling had loved someone, and that love had made a person who had her laugh and her stubbornness and a specific inherited disdain for inadequate coffee. The box no longer lived on a high shelf behind a closed door. It was just there, on the counter, in the ordinary light of a kitchen that was used every day, which was not the same as being over it, which was not the same as moving on, that phrase that had always struck Logan as dishonest, as if the past were a location you could drive away from if you just pointed yourself in a different direction. It was something else, something more accurate, something closer to the truth of how people actually lived when they had decided to live. It was carrying it with you openly into the next morning.